I see my children, I see my brother's children and other children, and I don't want them to ever have to experience any of that. And I will do my utmost to create change in the church and to help so children can be whole, developed individuals and have happy
This is
lives.
a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce herself. Suzie, please go ahead.
Hello, I am Suzie Greco. I am from Boston, Massachusetts, and I am really grateful to be here with you, Maurice, and all of your followers. It's really a privilege and honor to be able to speak with you and share a little bit about myself. So,
Yeah, and we're looking
um,
forward to that. And just for a quick, a note for the listeners, Suzie, because I'm really thankful because I asked you really on a short notice. So this is awesome. And also what is important is that Suzie is going to walk also as part of the 100-mile walk, and we're really grateful for that. So that's terrific. We will talk a little bit more later as well, but I just wanted to have that said before you start talking, Suzie. Sorry, please go ahead.
yeah, you're fine. No, I'm really excited to walk. I like to walk. It's it's a pastime of mine, and I'm really grateful for the initiative to be able to participate for a cause that I really I love and hold dear to my heart.
Mm.
So, okay, so here we go. You want to know about Suzie Greco? Okay.
Yes.
Um, so you can read my story in the Stone Sphere. I share a lot in there that was just published last year. And I really don't consider myself a writer. I kind of became a writer. There was a moment after I had finally spoken the unspeakable truth about child sexual abuse and found myself in a toxic, abusive marriage. And I would retreat. I'd sit on the floor in my bedroom in the corner with the door closed, feeling utterly shattered. And in that silent, quiet, persistent voice, not my own, would whisper, try to write your story. So it was an act of survival, a first attempt to piece a self back together from fragments. So I was born in Orem, Utah, in a home that from the outside looked like a portrait of faithful devotion. My parents were pillars in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, both serving in high leadership callings. So our world was the church, its rituals, its community, its language of eternal families. It was the air we breathed, everything centered around the church. So I'm the second of four children. My mother had converted in her youth with her sister. They came from a Protestant background to the LDS Church. And my father, he was also a convert from Catholicism. My father joined the church in the military. And then after the military, he served a mission for our church in Canada. And then he attended Brigham Young University, where my mom was also going to college. And then after they graduated, we moved back to the East Coast. But inside the sacred LDS family structure, there was a hidden fault line. I was sexually abused by my LDS father and my Catholic grandfather. So from a very, very young age, I learned a brutal calculus. For survival, compliance was the only currency, and silence was the rule. So I grew up without a voice, observing the world from behind kind of like an invisible glass. My only consistent comforts were a profound sense of the divine, a God who spoke to my heart, and a lion blanket that my aunt made me. It was my shield that I had. So I performed a kind of a profound disassociation. I severed my father's action in the dark from his revered role in the light, because everyone revered him, and from the God I loved. I held on to a truth that God loved me even if he didn't intervene to stop the abuse. He sent me dreams, vivid, future telling dreams, not fortune telling dreams, but future telling dreams that were like lifelines thrown across a chasm, proof of a reality beyond my own, something greater than myself. And so by the time I arrived at college at Brigham Young University, I was a master at compartmentalization. But inwardly, I was a storm of trauma, battling bulimia and a deep fundamental trust of everyone. I had no social skills. Somehow I made it through. And then seeking to serve, I then left for a mission for my church in Scotland. And there, in that rugged ancient landscape of my ancestors, I found soul food. I so love the Highlands, the West Coast, and the islands. These are dear to my heart. I call it God's country. But we didn't get to go out there very often. We were usually in the cities. Um, but even in that sacred space, trauma found me again. I experienced another sexual assault. And then when it was reported, the acting ecclesiastic leader blamed me. It was another devastating blow, a brutal lesson. The institution could not only fail to protect, it could actively betray. So returning home, I built what looked like a life, even though I was fairly empty and shattered. I started to work for a startup company. I met a man at church, a recent convert, a friend of my father's. I still was in this amnesia state. He was Italian and very charismatic. We married and we had 3 beautiful daughters. So for 26 years, I was a stay at home mother. My sanctuary became the earth itself, Mother Nature. I spent a lot of time with Mother Nature. When I was young, growing up, and then in my married life, I gardened extensively and expansively. And then realizing I was making a complete mess of our beautiful piece of property, I followed another dream, a literal nighttime message that said, go back to school. So I did. I started taking night classes for 5 years at Tower Hill Botanical Gardens, and I learned to listen to the land, to shape beauty with intention, and also the trauma that was held in my body was able to be released through digging, pulling weeds, and just working outside. The gardens I created on our property became a living testament to growth, a place visitors call deeply peaceful and beautiful. And my gardens have been on several prominent garden tours now. But the past has roots that run deeper than any tree. After my parents moved away, the memories I had locked away began to surface with a new, unignorable force. For years, I had symptoms, PTSD, anxiety, but when the abuser is still present, a prominent figure in your town and your church, speaking is next to impossible and the cost is unthinkable. So finally, I reached a point where the double life was a prison I could no longer inhabit. I spoke my truth. I did it with a naive, hopeful heart, believing it could be a cleansing fire, a path to heal for my entire family. But I was so wrong. The act of truth telling was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it was the first step off a cliff I didn't know I was standing on. My world disintegrated. My husband, who had promised support, began colluding with my father. My children were caught in the aftershock. The grandparents they adored were suddenly cut off. Their mother was emotionally incapacitated, and their father's abuse escalated. My church community, the ward, did not rally around me. Instead, I was stigmatized, labeled mentally ill, a narrative carefully controlled by the perpetrators. Both of them held positions in the church. The very systems I had turned to help, the church and the state became labyrinths of re traumatization. I had been a stay at home mom. I now had no income, and I was facing an abyss. And in that abyss, hope arrived in the most unexpected directions. First, and I know this sounds crazy, but from the other side of the veil, For 2 decades, I devoted myself to Italian genealogy work for my husband, meticulously indexing Catholic parish records for his ancestral towns. And I write about so many of these experiences in my book. When the human world offered no solace, it was his ancestors who reached across the veil with a palpable, unconditional love. It touched me in a place no human words ever could. That work wasn't just a hobby anymore, it became a sacred charge. I founded the nonprofit Italian Parish Records, and our mission is to preserve these fragile documents, the only records that hold the full history of the Italian families, and we're fighting to make them accessible. The Italian Catholic Church has prohibited this, and we believe this is a human rights issue. To know who you are and where you come from is a fundamental right of every person. It's part of your identity and who you are. Secondly, God placed me in the care of a certain man, David F. Holland, a Harvard divinity professor and the son of an LDS apostle. He was my ecclesiastical leader at the time. I was terrified. The idea of trusting an ecclesiastical leader was completely abhorrent. But our first meeting was a divine gift for us both. Here was a man steeped in the same culture who defied its worst instincts. He listened. He truly heard my dreams, my voice, my anger, and he held my pain, which is pretty severe at times. He treated me as an equal, a rarity in a structure that often teaches men they are the sole heads and the revelators. He used his authority to provide safety where he could, spiritual care, and a reflection of my worth when I could not see it. And also, I want to share a really personal experience that happened during this time because it kind of puts other things in context. So sometimes our hands know what our hearts yet can't put into words. And I began to build something, not with words or therapy, but with stone. So for months, I hunched over stone. I was crafting a sphere, a 6 foot stone sphere, solid, complete. And that's the name of my book, The Stone Sphere. And I didn't realize it then, but that sphere, it wasn't just a project. My hands and my aching heart, they were trying to tell me something. They were showing me what I needed to become. And the circle represents the whole self. So I read a lot of Carl Jung at the time. When the last stone was placed, I stood back, and there it was, a testament to my own will. I had made it. It was my own remaking, cast in stone. And then I had a dream. A knock on the door. A priesthood leader from my community was there. He didn't speak, just gestured for me to follow him. We walked through my gardens to where the stone sphere stood, or where it had stood. It was utterly shattered, utterly destroyed. Pieces were scattered all over. The stone sphere I'd poured myself into 7 months was now broken rubble. I fell to my knees. How? How could this have happened? This was me. This was me. This was my own remaking, and I was now ruined. In the void of despair, I heard a voice, gentle and firm, and it said, Susie, look up. Through a blur of tears, I lifted my head, and then another voice, not loud, but it spoke to my heart, like only the divine can. And it said, I will make of you something far more beautiful than you can ever make of yourself. And in that moment, I saw it, a sphere of breathtaking, impossible beauty. It was more intricate, more radiant, more alive than anything my hands could ever conceive. And the tears didn't stop, but their meaning changed. They were no longer tears of loss. They were tears of surrender. I finally understood my perfect stone sphere. It was a symbol of my own limited understanding, my blueprint for wholeness, and it had to shatter so that something divine could be built in its place. So the lesson wasn't about building, it was about allowing, letting go, and trusting, which is really hard for me. With every shattered piece of my being, that the divine hand could see what I was blind to. And that's when things really began to change for me. It was in this fragile, newfound space that another impossible dream merged to apply to Harvard Divinity School. Everyone thought I completely lost it. I needed a job, not a degree, but the path was unmistakable. I applied and was accepted. Walking onto that campus, just literally leaving a toxic marriage, experiencing severe PTSD, decades out of school, among dazzling articulate peers was terrifying. I just put my head down and worked. I learned new languages, the language of theology, ethics, and trauma studies. And it gave me the framework to understand my own life, not just as a personal tragedy, but as a case study in institutional power and sacred betrayal. And then dreams came again. Apply for a PhD. So my kids were really like, Mom, you need a job. But I applied, and once again, the doors opened. I'm now a doctoral candidate in practical and ethical theology at the University of Edinburgh Divinity School. My book was published last year. I have a few journal articles out. And this is my way of forging raw experience into rigorous argument. And this brings me to the work that now defines kind of the we. Last Friday, I stood at the inaugural Religion and Trauma Symposium at Harvard Divinity School. My presentation centered not just on my own story, but the stories of two other survivors of childhood sexual abuse in the LDS Church, cases that reached the highest levels of leadership, involving now Prophet Dallin H. Oakes and the brother of an apostle. The survivors presented their stories showing a pattern of institutional denial and protection. The LDS Church is a global institution with immense social and financial capital. They're the richest church in the world. It is in deep denial about the systemic problem of abuse within its walls. So my work is no longer just about my healing. It's about using academic rigor and public testimony to create tangible change. That same presentation will be given at Oxford fairly soon. We're pushing for press, not for sensationalism, but for illumination, to spark a much needed global conversation. And I'm going to take a step back just a minute. This is the personal calculus of institutional failure in the LDS Church. If I live to be 100, I will have lost 50 years, just over 50 years of my life to the aftermath of the abuse, childhood sexual abuse, while the abusers have faced zero consequences. This is not a unique equation. It's the lived reality of countless survivors who are silenced by systems designed to protect the powerful. My presentation, my research, it's about changing that math for all of us. So, my journey from a voiceless child to a gardener shaping beauty, to a genealogist preserving identity, then to Harvard, speaking power to truth, truth to power. This journey tells me one thing: our deepest wounds often contain the seeds of our most sacred callings. When we dare to voice our personal truth, it doesn't just shatter silence, it becomes a lens through which we can all see systemic brokenness a bit more clearly. In that scene, there is a potential for healing, and that is not just personal, it's collective. So I'm here with you today as part of the we, and thank you for let me share just a little bit about myself and my story.
Uh, no, and well, thank you, Susie, for sharing that story and to be with me here today. Um, I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Although, you know, it's great to see that where you are today. I feel it as well. Um, there are many questions that come into my head. Um, it seems, where you are now and what you're doing extremely important, and especially because so clearly your story is not a standalone. Um, right? I mean, we just have to read the news, and many people have experienced that. Um, but I think your work and what you just said, and it invites people to see themselves as part of something larger. And my question to you is, how do you help people understand their place within larger systems, whether that's communities, nature, or the planet itself? Do I have that correct? That's what you try to, or at least part of the messages that you try to convey?
Yeah, I didn't feel it for a long time that
Yeah.
I belonged to anything, because I didn't belong to anything really. I felt like I belonged to my church, and that gave me a sense of identity for quite a while. But then when I realized what my church was doing, that identity had to separate. I think survivors, at least all of the survivors, which I've spoken to of abuse, I've spoken to quite a few now through my research and other avenues, is they're disconnecting from religious organizations and connecting with the divine directly. And then they find these communities that hold them in a way that sustains them and enables them to succeed in whatever that their path or journey may look like. And it's obviously very different from everybody, but I see this in the women that I speak to, and a lot of youth also. They see the harms that have taken place in their families, and they can't accept that a religious institution would enable this. So they're seeking, they want that spirituality, they want connections, but they're doing it whether it's through nature or through other social groups or finding a cause that aligns with their values. Yeah,
May I ask, because you know, clearly um, spoke about David Holland um, as you know, one of those people that helped you to. I think on your website you call it the voice that steadied. You know,
yeah,
you
yeah.
and you name a couple. David Holland is one. Your brother, God, and sisters. But David Holland is part of LDS
He
or
is
was.
he
So
is very LDS.
okay, so how yeah, can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so in order to go to our temple, or temples all over the world, you actually have to have an interview with an ecclesiastical leader. And I 6 months before, I had met with an ecclesiastical leader, my stake president, and my parents to talk about the abuse. And that was a devastating blow because the ecclesiastic leader, they're not trained in how to handle these type of mediations. He said he believed both me and my father, and that that really sparked severe PTSD symptoms for me to not, I mean, to believe my father. So just anyway, it threw me. So 6 months later, I go in for a recommend for a temple interview. David Holland, who's the stake president at the time, he didn't usually do these temple recommend interviews. He left it to his counselors. And I'm sitting there waiting in the hall with other people, and in he walks, just like in our church, we talk about being guided by the spirit or intuition. And he brought me in for an interview, and I did not want to be in that office. I did not. All I knew about him was he had just moved into the area. He was a prominent family in the church because his father was one of the 12 apostles, and it scared me. He asked me questions and I didn't answer a lot of them. I just sat there, and he knew he wasn't getting anywhere. And finally, he just asked, so what? Well, let me backtrack. He had actually talked to my former husband. So he kind of had an idea that a lot of bad things were going on. But he didn't, he was just getting the narrative from my former husband. And he finally asked me, what's going on with you? And I told him what had happened, and he hadn't heard that side of the story. He just heard I was nuts. And then he didn't know what to do. he literally looked shaken. Like he did not know how to help me. Um, and after that, he then asked the temple questions. We had some pretty significant moments, and then he gave me a blessing, a priesthood blessing that's common in our church. And he said words I don't think he's ever said before in his life, and felt I felt it and he felt it. It was like a conduit from God. He was acting as a conduit from God, which I had never experienced before with a priesthood leader, ever before. When he sat down, he no longer sat behind the desk. He sat down right behind me and literally bowed his head and asked me, "Would you be okay if we met from time to time?" And I wanted to say, "No, I don't ever want to be in this office again. I don't ever want to see you again. Just give me the temple recommend and let me go. I just want to worship God in my own way." But I said yes. And so for a decade, literally a decade, at first we addressed the abuse of my father and grandfather. Like we'd meet every couple of months. And then um, he didn't really realize the abuse that I was experiencing in my marriage. And then he started to mediate, thinking, we can save this family. This is an eternal family. We must save you. And I couldn't I couldn't get it all out. So he walked this journey for 10 years with me and saw me through to the end to get me out okay. And my children. We're all scarred. But he went beyond what any ecclesiastical leader normally does. He didn't have to do any of this for my family. And I only walked with him, and I say this because I have not walked with a lot of ecclesiastical leaders and I don't believe in a lot of them. But I walked with him because I knew God wanted me to walk with him. And because he walked with me and I walked with him, he saw and experienced firsthand the problems that the church generates, by not training leaders, throwing them into positions that they shouldn't be, adjudicating, etc., domestic violence situations, etc. And then I'm a survivor on the other end. And here you have an ecclesiastical leader and a survivor. And if we could ever bring the two together with the information that they both have, it would create a lot of change in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. David is well respected at Harvard and he's well respected in the church. And I believe he should be called to create change in the church because that's how this church works, as men are called to these positions, not women. And they don't listen to survivors.
So, I mean, just to so that I'm clear. Um, so you continue to have those conversations with David. Does that mean that you consider yourself still to be part of LDS?
I am a member, yes.
Uh-huh.
I've had a lot of ups and downs. I kind of got kicked out of my ward that is closest to my home. I now attend another ward that's in Cambridge, in Boston. The bishop there, his mother was abused by his father, and so he understands abuse. Most leaders in the LDS church don't understand the dynamics of abuse and things going on, and many of them, um, women are disposable in the church and they keep the men. The men usually have the jobs. They pay tithing. They support the church financially and economically. And women oftentimes find themselves displaced by leaders who are very unsupportive of them. So I am still a member. I take it on my terms, though. It's
Yeah.
I don't take it on their terms. I have a love-hate relationship with the church. I I want to create change, and I know that the only voices that they listen to is those within. Those who step out, they literally like they cut them off and they don't listen to them anymore.
And and so, I mean, you were explaining about together with these other women, you spoke out, and more is going to happen. Um, yeah, are you, as a result, are you then in dialogue with other leaders of within the LDS community?
Yeah, yeah. I've been working with our area authority, Elder Scott Taylor. He is an academic also. He
Hmm.
works in organizational behavior. I tried to get a pilot project both through David and Elder Taylor to create change. He's been an advocate also, which I'm very grateful for. I have worked with a stake Relief Society president, another women leader who's very supportive. She's seen a lot of abuse and she's been very supportive of me. There are people in the temple presidency. I work at the temple, and many of them are also very supportive of me. But there's a difference between being supportive and actually being able to create change.
Yeah.
In order to be heard, like no one, I don't know how to say that. In order to get to the top, like both David Holland and Scott Taylor tried to get a pilot project through to create some change. That was, I was told they're working on it. I knew what that meant, that it was shelved. They weren't going to touch it. So I think these presentations at Harvard and also Oxford, which are going to get press, are going to draw attention, a lot of attention once they get out there. That will maybe make them think about change, but I really don't know. I don't know because the prophet of our church is an attorney, and he is backed by 350 billion in financial capital and assets, and they are backed by Curtin McConkie, a huge legal firm that literally addresses all of their problems. So because of their holdings, they really can do whatever they want. Yeah, whoever holds the money and the legal power, and in Utah politics, um, the political and civil and religious are intertwined. And this is where you see the theocracy, right? Where it's highly dangerous. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, I don't know how change is going to happen. I just know I keep trying to follow the path and
Yeah.
connect with people who might listen to me.
You were also, what fascinated me in your story is that you talked about your dreams, right?
Yeah.
Um, are they still ongoing?
Yeah, I still have dreams. I still see things sometimes, whether you want to call it mystical or whatever, but God does show me. He gives me like signposts or, yeah, he shows me different things so I know where to go or what to do or what direction. Because sometimes I feel very, very lost. And um, I love those dreams. I love them. When I have them, you wake up with this feeling that you're, I don't know how to describe it. It just it touches you to the deepest parts of your core that you know there is someone that knows your path, that you don't feel quite as lost or alone. And it's just, I don't know, it's an incredible feeling. So yeah, I still have those. Yeah.
And is that a result of meditation or is just when you sleep?
Um, I can have both.
Uh,
I'll share one experience. When I was working with David Holland, there was at one point I was reading my scriptures in my room, and I was reading the words, and I saw a flash, like a movie, come before my eyes. Instead of seeing the words on the page, I saw David Holland dressed in all white and radiant light, and I thought that was really weird. Why did I just see that? The next morning, was scheduled to go to the temple, and I was sitting waiting for the session to start, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned around, and there was David Holland, all dressed in white. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, so God knows me. He knew I was going to be here today. He knew David Holland was going to be here today. We hadn't talked and said those things that we were going to be there. And I needed that because I was drowning in pain and just abuse. It was hard. And sometimes I get those like visions or something will come across my mind and I'll see it. Like when I was applying to Harvard, it was crazy. I was seeing Harvard all over the place, and I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm gonna apply to Harvard. Like this is so I don't know. These images can come, and I don't know how they come. I don't seek them out. I don't
Hmm.
ask for them. They just come, and I do spend a lot of time meditating, and I do a little bit of yoga, and I need that for my health. And I spend a lot of time outside in reflection and thinking. That's kind of been my makeup from early on childhood, spending so much time alone. I spent a lot of time with nature and reflecting on people's kind of always in the background, looking at people, watching them, watching what's going on. So maybe that's part of my like makeup. I don't
Sure.
know,
Sure.
but I'm grateful for it because I don't know, it provides sustenance that comes from no other place.
Mm. When you look at the world right now through that lens, what concerns are on your mind at the moment?
Uh, Through the lens of spirituality or through the lens of GBV?
Through the lens of, the dreams that you have, what you experience, yes, you know, um, gives your
Yeah.
personal experience and learnings. So,
Yeah, some of my concerns are we don't take enough time to be still. We really don't. We live in this crazy environment where we're so busy, we have to achieve, and I feel these pressures intensely. My children feel them. Um, I I also have these concerns because we lose touch with ourselves. We lose touch with a God that or the divine, however it looks for you, which can be a resource that looks beyond ourselves and what we like. If you think about economics, like what I'm doing right now in my 50s, getting a PhD doesn't make any sense, right? I should be retiring in 10 years or whatever, but it's the right path for me, right? And I feel divinely held. So I think a lot of times we're our children are growing up to be intellectual, forgetting the spiritual the spiritual side and going what is their path and not a path just laid out to them by, I don't know, whoever it may be that's in their life that tells them this is the right thing for you to do. But to hear the inner voice is, I think, a little bit more difficult for people to do in their situations. And so that's one concern. I do want to talk about this concern I have that's a little bit separate from what you just asked, but so gender inequality, it drives abuse, right? And this really harms everyone in society. And it's interwoven into the spiritual formation and upbringing of children in patriarchal faith religions. And this to me is terrifying. It really is terrifying. So when a girl is taught that her ultimate purpose, and I was taught this, I feel like I was brainwashed into this. My ultimate purpose is dependency, to marry and to be part of a unit, led by a man. The man is the head of the household. You are not equal, you're subordinate. So we never develop our own independent selves. And then we're tasked with having children to lead them to develop to be whole individuals. And so I think some of these core teachings in gender inequality that a lot of patriarchal religious institutions have, these are really harmful for mothers, children, boys, and it creates these cycles of abuse that continue to be dominated throughout time. And and I really, really, really wish that this would stop, that we could change that paradigm. And even though they have the words that say, yeah, all people are equal, well, no, not in reality. You hold the money, the authority, the positions, and then you teach women that they're subordinate to the man. Anyway, sorry. That's a big concern of mine because I don't want children to grow up in spiritually being formulated in inequality.
Mm. And you were also very active in that space, right? I mean, it's um, yeah, part of several working groups around uh, gender-based violence, etc. So um, what I've heard when I talked about, what's happening in that space is that there is a lot of pushback at the moment, around gender equity, gender justice. Where do you think that comes from? Is that yeah? Because it seemed for a while to go into the right direction, and now it's almost reversed.
Yeah, I think you're so right there. Yeah, I work with SVRI in two of their working
Mm-hmm.
groups, and I attend the meetings of the third one because I think they're all just so important and interconnected. Um, Gender equality in religions is really, really tough because you're breaking through to break through patriarchy is I don't it's just so hard. So hard. I'm only going to speak to I see it in the Catholic and the LDS Church. And these are the two predominant, wealthiest churches on the earth and have so many congregation and churches everywhere. Um for them to acknowledge that women should be in leadership and that might actually be the actual divine way of doing things instead of just the Bible. So one of the scholars that I got to talk to this past Friday at Harvard Divinity School was Dan McClellan. He's a Bible scholar and he kind of breaks down a lot of the myths, uh, mistruths in the Bible. And there's a lot of women now. It's the stories that we've told that, Christ had 12 apostles, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how this churches have to be structured. Well, men put the Bible together and how men translated the Bible. It's a story that was created by men. And that story needs to be retold. But in order to retell it, you have to rewrite the Bible, and reposition these stories that, there were a lot of women involved. And that doesn't come easy because the Bible has been the story that we've accepted and used. It's used everywhere. And so to put that in a different place, saying data over dogma, meaning the data shows that gender inequality creates violence, so your structure can't be divine. They that that's going to take a while to sink in, right? To create real change because they hold the power and they like holding the power. A lot of these men like holding the power. We If you look at the pyramid of gender-based violence, at the bottom of the pyramid is like sexist jokes, just a lot of just normalizing of sexism. And then you go up the pyramid to coercion and financial abuse and violence, physical violence. In our church, I don't know about other churches, I'm only going to speak to mine. We have a lot of sexism. We they the prophet has made jokes over the pulpit, gaslighting women's experiences, and these are on record. You can listen to them. And so this is the base of what we're starting. We have to work with, right? And so if you have a lot of sexism at the start, and you have these misconceptions of the Bible that aren't really true, and you have this data showing this can't be divine because I don't think God would have women and children hurt like this. It takes a lot to get that through to these men because they've been cultured in these environments where it's acceptable and it's okay and they've been ritualized. This is one of the things that I study, and I won't get too deep into this because I'll probably lose everybody, but we are ritualized in our temples and in our practices that men are to be a certain way and women are to act in a certain way. So the women just fall in line. They fall in line. And the men like that. The men want that. They want submissive women. They don't want women who will stand their own. They don't want women who will talk back. So they call women to leadership in our church who are not their equals, but who will bow and say, yes, okay, I'll do that. And it's really hard. Sorry, I've gone off on a lot of different tangents there. This is a big issue. It's really hard to create change.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's complex.
No. Thanks for giving your take on that. What is happening? Um, Susie, what I hope that this podcast is contributing to is that people would feel connected with each other and then start maybe talking with each other, and the dialogue will start. Because I've had guests, they don't necessarily all agree. I've also had guests of LDS, for example, and where I had people that are more on the left or more on the right or more, whatever. Um, Still, what I hope is that we all realize that nobody can be wrong 100% of the time. So there is always opportunity to connect. And one of the ways I'm trying to do that is connecting not only you with me and with the listeners, but also connect you with the previous guest. And the previous guest has a question for you that I would like to share.
I think in terms of the the changes or the shifts that we're seeing in terms of the kind of global power frames, what comes next? Or what do you think needs to come next?
Yeah, so this is a big question. Really great question. So if global power merely changes hands without changing, I guess, its fundamental nature, I think we're just simply resetting the clock on the same cycle of domination and instability. Um, so from a perspective centered on ending, domestic violence and gender-based violence, I guess these grand geopolitical shifts look like scaled up versions of the same destructive dynamics, in my mind at least. So, traditional power, whether it's in the household or among the nations, it's built on hierarchy, control, and domination. And this is the engine of both intimate abuse and international conflict. So, simply swapping with nations or blocks, who sits atop the pyramid, doesn't necessarily change the underlying game, at least in my mind. Um, it's still women and children are really the first to suffer in these situations. So I think, and this is in order for radical transformation in how power is defined and exercised, and moving from domination power frameworks to relational, power frameworks. And I think this means prioritizing individuals in safety and shifting. We always talk about prioritizing metrics, and we measure those things that we prioritize. So imagine if we actually measured the security of a child at home, domestic violence, we, those those things that we're not capturing right now, instead of trade, et cetera, et cetera. But really to show how a more relational dynamics are affecting us. So yeah, just changing players or countries. I'm not sure it's going to shift a whole lot.
When you talk about, relations, um, what comes to my mind is, inner development goals that were developed not that long ago by, by the more secular world, let's say. And when I always tell them to face people from faith or from the faith-based world, they say, hey, but this is what we do. I wonder if that's the case. But just, if you're not familiar with that, they are the result of the fact that we are not reaching the sustainable development goals, right? The 17 sustainable goals. And this growing group of people that said, well, one of the reasons we think that we are not reaching those goals, that are looking at processes and system changes, is that we did not pay attention to the ability, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community. And they came up with 5 inner development goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And then 25 skills were identified, like empathy, critical thinking, um, resilience. Um, so maybe a quick question around that is: had you heard about the inner development goals? And if yes, if no, that doesn't actually matter. But what are your thoughts when you hear them? And does that somehow relate with what you're trying to advocate for as well?
Yeah, it fits perfectly what I'm speaking to. So yeah, these are newer to me. I wasn't that familiar with them until recently, but I think, and I'm just going to say this, I think all religious leaders should actually be trained in inner development goals. I think it would make a profound difference in ministerial effectiveness and also shifting probably the conscious awareness and, big issues like GBV. It might really shift things for that. I think those who hold stewardship and moral authority over spiritual and material well-being of others carry a significant responsibility in the IDG framework. Focusing on these inner capacities would really equip religious leaders with greater wisdom, resilience, and compassion. Um, so I I know it's kind of like a secular context that you're presenting this and doing this, but it really aligns closely with the virtues developed in professional ministry training. But it's looking at it in a different way where it's internal, which we don't focus on,
Yeah.
especially in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most of the time we're focused outwardly. We are to serve others and do all this work, and we aren't taking care of the inner self. And because everyone's on this treadmill, they call it, the church treadmill. As long as you keep going on it, you just keep doing, but you don't really know what you're doing or why you're doing it, except you're serving God and the people, and that's all that matters. And they're not listening to the inner self, developing that, and that would really strengthen communities. And I think that, I mean, this is, I shouldn't say this, but I think it should be required to do that inner development first before you go try to serve a whole congregation of 200, 300 people. It'd make all the world of difference.
Mm. And Susie, these conversations always go fast. I could listen for so much longer to you, and we will, do that. Maybe when, one day we will really walk together, when we're in the same space, right? Um, um, we talked about this in the beginning. You will contribute to this year's 100-mile walk, and I'm really thrilled about that. Can I ask you what drew you to be part of it, and what does the journey represent for you personally? And I know
Um,
people should go to 100mile.org and then support you, and then you wrote about this. But for those who haven't seen it,
yeah, I've never actually done anything like this before. This is a first for me. And the only reason that I am doing it, because this is kind of like not typical of what I usually do, um, is because I feel so deeply that you have this platform. I stand behind the research that you're doing in a global way to bring change, and to bring people together at local levels and bigger community levels, et cetera, et cetera. And with all of my heart, if I can walk and help make a difference that one child in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not experience sexual abuse, that does not lose 50 years of their life, then I will walk. I will walk. I I I can't tell you the pain I've lived through. I mean, my life has been a disaster. It's been a wreck, and the pain I've been I've wanted to just leave this earth life so many times because it has been too painful of an experience. And I see my children, I see my brother's children and other children, and I don't want them to ever, ever have to experience any of that. And I will do my utmost to create change in the church and to help so children can be whole, developed individuals and have happy lives, live happy, I don't know, just more peaceful, happy lives here on this earth.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Susie, music is very important to me. And so I always like to bring in something a bit more personal. I warned you in advance because most guests find this the most difficult question that I'm asking. So if I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music that, you know, captures something, what is essential about who you are, which song or piece of music would that be and why?
Okay, so that's a great question. So my all-time favorite song is "Consider the Lilies." It's performed by the Tabernacle Choir. So this connection is kind of deeply personal because my name is Suzanne, which means lily. So, and I love plants, and I think about this in relation to my growth and plants growing. So for me, the line speaks to the difference between what we see on the outside and what's truly happening on the inside. Plants' most important growth happens underground in the roots, long before the bloom is visible. So I think our personal and spiritual growth is often the same. It's hidden, quiet, and internal, a lot of times. And I have these beautiful lilies in my yard. They're Casablanca, and they're stunningly beautiful and they're incredibly fragrant. I always cut a bunch of them and bring them inside so that their aroma can fill my home. So, in the same way, the song feels like bringing something beautiful and fragrant into my spirit. It reminds me that growth is, it's unseen and that there's guidance in the midst of these winding paths of roots finding their way down wherever they're going, and that there's a nurturing presence attending to all of it. So, from the lilies of the field to the quiet, unfolding story of the soul, I love that song.
Great. No, thank you. And we will add that song to a playlist that we created on Spotify, although I'm still in the process and my listeners know that to get it also to other um, to YouTube, etc. Because Spotify is not the greatest, far from the greatest for the musicians. So the musicians that I've had on this podcast told me, Maurice, you need to go somewhere else. So I'm trying to do that, but it's a little bit complex. Then maybe my last question is your question for the next guest, because I had forgotten about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. My question for the next guest, and I won't say this absolutely correctly, but is how can we get patriarchal religious organizations to recognize that patriarchy does not does not work? um, that there needs to be equality in power and authority and keys in religious organizations. And how can we bring about that change? What are the steps that we can take to help bring about that change?
Okay. Susie, thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me and, uh, for who you are, what you do. Is there any question that I did not ask you today that I should have asked you?
Oh, there's probably a lot of questions you should have asked me. No, no, I've enjoyed this time together. This has been great. Probably talk for a couple hours, with all these
Yeah.
so many different things. So I appreciate you having me and allowing me this platform to share.
Great. Yeah. Again, thank you so much. And yeah, it's keep on doing what you do. It's extremely important. It's very inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here with you and your listeners today. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.